Terry Lynn, Traveling Artista. This video has some watercolor, and I'll call it techniques too. A little more interesting or advanced techniques. Okay, these next processes are going to take a little extra time, so just to let you know. This has Dawn in it, my spray bottle. So you can see there's the soap. I take my old brush and work the soap into that. Now, you don't really want to paint with that, although you can. Here, let me show you while doing that. I'm going to do it right in my hand. I'm going to pick up a little paint over here, mix it in with the soap, and then I'm going to paint that right here with the bubbles in it. And you can see it's kind of got a bubbly surface to that, and it's going to basically dry that way. Okay. But what I want to do now is clean my hand, and I am going to, again, with this soap, I'm going to get soap into my brush so it's clean, and the soap is going to cause a resist, or it's going to protect the brush, sorry. I'm just wiping off those extra bubbles from the outside. So it is going to protect my brush, and I have a marked brush with this blue tape on it from, this is an old brush, from the Maskit or the Resist. Now these come with little brushes in them, this particular one, but I don't want to use that. So I'm going to pick up some of this, and it comes under different names, Maskit, Frisket, something like that. And what I'm doing now is I'm picking it up, but I'm also, kind of pointing the brush so that there's a point on that. And I'm just going to paint this on my paper. And you can't really see it. Some of these come, I'm so used to dipping in the bottle, some of these masking fluids come with a little tint in them, so when you put them on the paper you can actually see where they are. Now I've done this pretty thick, so that's going to take a while to dry. So you would probably have a sketch on your paper, put the masking fluid right where you want to retain your white paper shining through, and that is just a cheap Joe's one. Now that there's soap in that, I can clean this brush quickly and easily and come back to this when it's dry, and it maintains my brush. You want to get the masking fluid out of the brush as soon as possible. Now I realize I have masking fluid in my water, so I don't want to use that water for painting with right now. So I'm going to set that aside. And I hope that dries so I can show you soon. Another method is not to get your brush handle in your paint. So this is a rather tight setup just for the video. So my next aspect is going to be with the salt. So I'm going to pick up, kind of just scrubbing into my paint here, gently scrubbing. And I'm going to pick up, I already have a little puddle of it here. That looks pretty thick to me. I mean, you might want it that dark, and try to remember that your paint will dry about 1/3 lighter than how you put it down. So what I'm doing now is just tipping the point of that brush into the water to get a little more water into my brush. I'm going to do a nice flat wash here as quickly as possible. I have a slightly textured paper, so that's, you can see that resist there. I want to make this nice and smooth, paint it, get it down there, and leave it. Rinse out my brush, set it down, and then I get the salt. Now, you can't see, but if I tilt my head and I look toward the light, this still is rather shiny on the surface. And it's dry in here, so this is going to dry rather quickly. And I want to wait until some of that shininess has gone away. In this area, it's already getting that transitional, not dry, not wet. It's getting a little more matte. So at this point, I'm going to put a little salt, and I like to do this. I like to put some salt, hello salt, into my hand and pinch it and drop. I can control it better that way. And I'm just dropping not much. You don't want too much of this in there. And a little bit over here and a little bit over there. Now you can begin to see it doing something. It's just beginning. I'm going to save a little of this salt to the side, and I'm going to kind of keep my eye on it, because the way this is going to work is as the paint dries, then the salt is going to do its job of bringing that paint into itself. One of the third time-consuming tricks is with your plastic wrap. I'm going to pick up a little green, rather thick here. I have some salt. And I'm just going to put in some strong brush strokes like this, leaving some white showing. The blue is darker, so I'm just going to pick up some of this blue while I have the brush ready to go. And I'm going to throw that in as well. I would like a little more pigment, or rather paint, on that brush, so I'm going to go and get a little bit more there. And I'm going to throw that in. Then I will take the plastic wrap, kind of wrinkle it up for texture, and I'm going to set that on top of that wet paint. And sometimes I like to weight it down. Now if you look at it, you can already see how the plastic wrap is allowing some air to go in some places, and it is creating very interesting geometrical shapes where it is touching the paper. I'm looking back at my salt. I'm not sure if that one's working. I'm going to try another one while we're right here working on this. Now remember, when you're picking up paint, to get your brush in there and gently, circly scrub it to pick up paint. Even with this wider brush, I can get that in there. Then transfer some of this to your mixing area, either on that palette or right here on this palette. And you play around with this and find a certain amount, the balance between the water and the paint that you want. I'm going to try it also and see what happens with the green paint. Again, it's a timing situation, and the only way you really learn how to do this is by playing with it until you figure something out. Here, it does not seem to be drawing that salt as well as I was hoping it would. You do the same thing, let me do it here, when you're working with the spray. You lay down some of the paint, and then at the right moment, now I'm going to cover these because I'm waiting for that to dry just a little more, and I'm just going to check my spray off to the side, and then I'm going to, one spray right there, push, kind of spreads it out. You can see it affected it right there as well. I'm going to get a little more salt because I think that top one is just about ready for me to drop some salt in. Now if you put too much salt down, it's not going to work well. So you want a little bit, and you want it to be spread out. Now I'm going to wait. I'm going to pause the video, and we're going to come back to this in a moment. Okay, it's been, I don't know, about 10 or 15 minutes. I've been waiting for some of these to dry. So now's the time to kind of check out what's happened. The salt here looks fairly dry, so I'm going to kind of brush it off very lightly to see what it reveals for a texture. That's a very, very subtle texture. If I brush it here and I brush these, again, this is quite subtle, but you can see, especially on the green and a little bit on the blue, how it almost looks like snow now settling there. And I'll take a picture of these after so you can zoom in on the photo. So that worked fairly well. Now over here I did the same thing. This is still a little damp, but I did the same thing but on a different type of paper. And this paper is a little better quality. I'm just going to lightly, it's still not quite dry, but I'm going to lightly brush that off. And you can see it's a little more distinct than here. This is a little sharper. This has a little more of the feathering effect than here. Now here is where I took the blue and green and I just sprayed it with water. And you can see the variety of texture that it has in there. Again, over here I did the same thing. This was still rather wet, so it was a greater spread of the texture. If you wait until it's a little more dry, you'll get a more concentrated feathering on that. The bubble, I'm not sure if you can see that. I'll move it over a bit. This is with the soap bubbles, and you can see it's got a little bit of bubbly stuff in there. It's kind of a cool technique too if you want, maybe in clouds or something like that. You can also blot and lift that if you want. Now back to our other experiments. I'm going to, this is the plastic wrap, gently, and you can watch to see, I can tell it's not quite dry because as I lift it, it starts to move the paint a little. You can test that and leave it on if you want, or you can go ahead. Let's just do that to see where we are with this. See what an interesting texture. I mean, what could you use that for, right? Maybe flowers, maybe wood. Just think of all the different things you can do. And once you've done it and it's there, maybe, let's experiment a little bit. It's still a little bit wet, so I'm just going to drop in a little bit of color. I'm just picking up paint over here and dropping it in, and that will darken those areas. Or you can also get a very fine, get your rigger brush, which is your really tiny, tiny brush, if you have one of these, and possibly even very carefully strengthen the outline on some of these. Again, I'll do a close-up of this so you can see the details that I'm creating on this. And it has a natural shape, so it saves you quite a bit of time of trying to make a natural shape. And I think our instinct sometimes is to make things very tight, and this, by following it, you go like, oh, that's more unusual. That's not a shape I would choose. So see how you can follow that, and that's kind of fun. I did another one up here with brown. This is quite wet still, but you can see almost flower petals in there. Maybe a nice, if you did it in the right shape. I didn't really shape it, I just kind of threw it on there. But it could almost be like petals for a peony or a flower like that, or just a mass of bushes. And you can define it a little more if you'd like to. Here is my resist. It's not quite dry, but I'm going to play with it anyway. The paint is dry. You want this resist to be dry before you paint over your wash. So I painted a wash over the resist. And now I can lift that resist. And I have two tools. I have this one that you can purchase, and it's just kind of like a hard rubber cement almost. And you kind of just rub lightly on the top of that and see how it lifts that right off. Ba-dum! And you have a nice, clear, white area underneath. One aspect of this is that somebody who knows can tell that you've used resist. It has such a distinct outline that you can tell. Now, if you don't have one of these fancy tools, you can take a glob of resist, put it on, say, aluminum foil or something, and eventually let it dry out, and you can make your own lifting tool, which is what I've done here. So this will do the same thing. It's just the resist dried up, and I've lifted it up in a clump, and it kind of sticks to itself, see? And it will just lift that right up. And as you lift these things, see how it pulls and lifts? You can augment your little tool. You just smush it right in there, and now you have a little bigger tool. So that's what the resist will do. And again, if you'd like to, you can add a little shadow there. Just do some of your little brush work to add shadow. Or you can also fill it in with a different color. Let's say we have a very light yellow we want to put in there. Oh, wow, that's a very bright yellow. And now we can follow along and put that bright yellow right in there. So there's a lot of things you can do with it. And these are some of your techniques that are kind of fun to do. I wanted to show once more the ribbon effect. With the ribbon effect, I have to check. Oh yes, I'm close up on my video. So I will take a damp wash brush, the one that's thin like this or wide. And remember how versatile it is. Try to use the widest or the largest brush you can for as long as you can. And by taking this and then tipping it and turning it on its end and then laying it back down, I'll get that nice ribbon. But what we want to do is double load the brush. It's called double loading. So you load one side with one color and one corner with the other. So we're going to load this corner of the brush with one color, and we're going to load this corner of the brush with another color. So let's do something kind of fun and distinctive. I'm going to try yellow. I'm going to just blend. I'm going to my palette to just soften it into the brush a little bit more. And let's go with this magenta. See if that's wet enough to go. Now my brush separated a little bit, so I know it's a little dry. I just touched the very tip. I just very touched the tip of that, barely to the water, just to dampen it a little bit more. Hardly even touched it. So I load the yellow on one corner and the magenta on the other corner. I lay it down, drag it across. This is very wet. So I just dried my brush a little bit, and I'm picking up some more. I've messed it up here. Let me try this again. All right. Pick up the yellow on one side, the magenta on the other side, just with the very corner of that in the paint. All right, let's try this again. Lay it down, drag the brush across gently, lift, turn the brush over and push it down the other way. And that's how you get that nice ribbon effect. Side load one corner with one color, another color in the other corner, drag, lift it up to its tip top, twist on its very end of the brush hairs, and then press it back down again for a ribbon. And remember, because this is so thin on the side, you can make nice, if you need some very thin little lines, instead of maybe trying to draw very straight lines with your rigger brush this way, this is quick and easy, and you have some nice straight lines like that. So there are some of your other techniques. Pa-dum! and get my tripod to hold still. I just want to review some of these. This was kind of just a burnt umber, flat wash, sprayed lightly with water to get that effect. This was the burnt umber with salt, let it dry, wipe it off. This is kind of that burnt umber and some red. I put the plastic wrap on it, waited for it to dry, and then lifted it to create these interesting shapes. Let me turn this way. This is a graded wash with the yellow. So you start with a nice wash, you add a little water as it goes down, you have that graded wash. On top of that, once it was dry, I did some splattering, this tiny splattering, with the toothbrush. This splattering was with my calligraphy brush, and then these green lines were just a dry brush across the top. This was a flat wash of the gold. Then I dropped in wet on wet with the magenta. So while the gold was still wet, I dropped in that magenta and it just bled out and really bled and blended with the color behind it. Okay, my stuff's getting in the way. Sorry, gonna move this. Again, a graded wash. This was when after the yellow was totally dry, I took my calligraphy brush, clean water, scrubbed it a little bit, blotted it with a paper towel, and lifted that out so it's a soft glow there. Right there, that's a soft glow. These leaves were done after the yellow was totally dry. With the brush stroke we did, you stay up on the tip of your calligraphy brush, drag it, press it down, and then lift it back up again to get these shapes. And that is exactly what I did here with these as well. And it's good to practice a number of those so you get used to that brush stroke. Here, two types of splatter, a flat wash of the yellow, the toothbrush splatter, and this was a splatter with tapping my calligraphy brush. It's more bold and less controlled. Here again, the gold was wet and I pulled wet magenta through it, and you can see the effect you get with that. This example shows a graded wash of the green. I then took a damp and clean calligraphy brush and pulled that across. It was clean, so as I pulled, I kind of twisted to lift up some of that green paint off the paper. Lifted it right up. Did it twice to get that effect. It's not as sharp, but it's fairly clean. While this green was still damp as well, I took the beveled edge, where am I? There I am, the beveled tip on the handle of this brush. I have a beveled tip there. It's hard to see. And I just scraped that and dragged it through that paint and pushed it away for those clean lines. This area was still damp. I took a dry paper towel, pressed once, lifted, took that away, and then I kind of outlined it with my calligraphy brush. I didn't do a great job there, but you get the idea. These darker lines, while this green was still wet, I really, instead of kind of flatly dragging that through, I used the very tip of it and scratched the paper. And then what happened is the green paint went into those scratches. Here, oh, that's upside down for you. This is going to be a little tricky, sorry. So this was done with my calligraphy brush, and I showed you the brushwork. Up. Remember, branches the lighter, smaller ones go up. The medium ones, the ones in the middle, go out, and then the heavier ones go down. And then you can drop in some color while it's still wet, so you get wet and wet for the shadow areas near the trunks. Later this was a flat wash of the blue. You can hear there's still some salt in there to get that starry effect with the salt. Put the wash down, let it partially dry. When it loses its shiny sheen, then you drop the salt in and leave it alone until it's totally dry. Here's the same. These two areas were partially dried washes, the flat wash, and then I sprayed it with my spray bottle of water. Oh, I haven't moved this down. I apologize. There's the green one, and there's the one that has been sprayed with water. Here is a plastic wrap texture. And here is the resist. Paint it on the clean paper first. Let it dry. Once it's dry, do a nice flat wash over the top of everything with your color. Let that totally dry, and then lift the resist off with your lifting tool. Here is another example. Oh, taking my wire with me. Of the plastic wrap, and then defining in here, following some of the edges of that to emphasize some of the shapes. Notice I didn't outline them all the way around. I just kind of indicated a little shadow area. And then this one, where is it? Is the soap bubbles, the blue. So you can see there's a very subtle soap bubbly texture to that. Now those are just some of the basic techniques, but it should give you a good idea of things you can do with watercolor washes and techniques and brushes, and we'll work more on brush techniques later on. I hope this helps. If you have any question, you know how to email me, but please do contact me and maybe sign up for my newsletter while you're around. Okay, now go play with some of these ideas, and don't forget to subscribe below. Email me if you have any questions.